Welcome back to the Lead to Win podcast, the podcast where we explore strategies, mindsets, and stories behind successful leadership and personal development. Wherever you are, wherever you're listening, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. Let's do it. Again, welcome and thanks for tuning in today. This episode of the Lead to Win podcast today, I'm visiting with Bret Magpiong. Bret has served his entire professional career as both an advisor to entrepreneurs, executives, professional athletes, entertainers, and their respective companies, and as a C-level executive for various wealth advisory firms. Many of the individuals and companies he has advised and served have been recognized on the Forbes 400 and Fortune 500 listings. He's also been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the RIA Channel, the Family Wealth Alliance, and the Schwab IMPACT. Bret also wrote a book titled The Delta Theorem, an innovative framework for being fully alive and truly wealthy, which launched in May of 2023. This book unearths the role you play in the larger story of life and facilitates your discovery of how you can live at your fullest, highest, and best. Excited to unpack some of this today. And Bret, welcome and thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
So tell me a little bit about your upbringing and what kind of got you into the line of work you do.
Yeah, I am a Los Angeles native. I currently live in Redondo Beach, and I grew up here in a suburb of Los Angeles. I think you'll appreciate probably this aspect of my upbringing is that the first test I ever remember failing as a kid was I was asked to name the 4 seasons. And I said football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, because in my household, those were the only seasons. We didn't have winter, spring, summer, or fall out here. So, we were very much an athletic minded, family. And so competition and sports always has played a significant role in my life. It not only as a young person and going through college, I was a rugby player in college, which was kind of a fraternity, if you will, of people there. And then ultimately I got a job with a very large professional services firm coming out of school. I think one of the funny stories about that is that, again, going back to just my mindset, I went to this on-campus interview and the person, asked me at the time, there were these 8 big firms and they were called the Big 8. And so she asked me, well, tell me what you know about the Big 8. And I said, well, I think it's a football conference in the Midwest somewhere, right? And she had this look on her face of, he's either messing with me or, this guy literally didn't know. And I think she saw the look on my face of total authenticity. And I just literally did not know that. And it probably endeared me to her because I actually ended up getting a job offer from that particular firm. So that was the launch of my career, and it was 35 years into it, and now I'm on to new chapters in my life.
Yeah, I'm interested to know a little bit more about your rugby playing days. I had a coach. I actually grew up with his son, but he was a rugby player, and he was the only other one that I've ever met. Tell me about rugby, the sport, and the effects it has on your body.
Yeah, let me step back a little bit and kind of tell you how I got into it. I mean, rugby was not a big sport in the States, at least, 35, 40 years ago when I was playing. And I mean, the reality is that college was the first time in my life that I remember that I didn't have any organized team that I was a part of. I wasn't a scholarship player. I didn't play any kind of sports in college. And so I found myself, kind of lost to a certain extent, if you know what I mean, just missing that camaraderie, missing practice. Believe it or not, I disagree with Allen Iverson that, it isn't just practice, right? It was coming together of stuff. So rugby was a club sport at the school that I went to. And, I joined this club as a sophomore and ended up playing 3 years there. The sport itself is really as I got into it and learned more about it, it's just a fantastic sport from a number of different angles. One, obviously the toughness that's required is kind of the the urban myth, if you will, that's a truth inside of things. But very different than football, where you can throw your body with all this equipment into somebody when you're tackling somebody. When you don't have pads and equipment on, you have to actually learn tackling technique a lot more. Otherwise, you can really hurt yourself, right? You can't duck your head and those kinds of things. So, just learning that aspect of things was really great. The other component of rugby, which was and it's true, I think, across the board in terms of rugby, is that after the game, there was always a party for both teams. And so you had this situation where, on the pitch, you were absolutely fighting it out with somebody, and it can get pretty rough, as you could imagine. But then afterwards, the home team always threw a party, and both teams came together, and it was terrific from that standpoint. I fell into something that was even beyond my expectations in terms of scratching that itch of that competitive athletic mindset that I had grown up with. So, that's really the component of rugby that sticks with me even to this day.
Have you read the book about the New Zealand All Blacks by chance?
I actually have. Yeah, it's a leadership book, right? About those guys. Yeah,
it's probably one of the
terrific.
best books I've ever read, and that kind of opened my eyes to the sport and the fraternity, like you mentioned, that it really is. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So you work with a number of companies and high level professionals. What would you say is one thing off the top of your head that all of those people, all those successful people, have in common?
Well, it actually dives a bit into my book, which I won't go into right now, but the book itself touches on the things that I learned from all these very successful people. And that is that this Delta Theorem that that is the title of the book, it incorporates a number of different elements that I found in these very successful people. For instance, one of them is that I recognize that they always had a very powerful why. They knew what their purpose was. But the problem is, for most of us, is that it's such a large question as to, like, tell me what your purpose is. It's almost overwhelming. And it can be for them too. I mean, by the time that I was working with them, they were well through their powerful why. They were successful in living it out. But what I found is that the components of the powerful why were things like this: priorities, knowing what was most important to them. So it could be stage of life. They were married or they weren't. They had a strong career. They had kids, priorities and understanding what their priorities were. There was also principles. They always had things that they stood for. Okay. And they weren't necessarily, per se directly from a religious upbringing or that. They were often, but there was also like family of origin, even culturally here in the United States. There's some stands that people have. And so they were very principled people. And then there was also always a component of passion that they had. Like, what was the thing that just made them come alive? And what I found was that, and this is what I touch on in the book, was that purpose that I found in them and even in my own life was the concentric bringing together of those other 3 P's: priorities, principles, and passion. That when those overlapped in and of themselves, people's purpose starts to come out from there. And so I found that, that's what was a very significant common thread amongst them. Now, we never sat down. They didn't say, well, let me tell you what this was, and let me tell you that, and here's what my powerful why is. No, in developing relationships with them, in working with them in each one of their unique places, I got to see those elements really come alive, inside of what they were doing. And so, those were some of the things that were there. Another component of stuff, and again, this part of the Delta Theorem, is that effort always comes into play. Look, purpose is great, Powerful why is wonderful, and it can be written in calligraphy and stuck up on your bookcase somewhere. But if you don't do anything about it, it does nothing. And so effort was always a significant component. They worked hard, for what they had accomplished. And then failure was a significant component too, and that is learning from failure. So, those are the things that I saw across the board with people, and that's what I talk about and touch on in my book.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm always like a 3 C's or 3 P's guy. So that really resonates in my head. I saw, I think it was on your website. It's a little Venn diagram. It's probably, directly based off your book, but you laid out that kind of stuff very plainly and ways that people can understand it. And I love how you said that all three of those things work off of each other. And because I was going to ask a follow-up question about, it sounds kind of silly, but how can a person just consistently keep their purpose in the forefront of their mind and let it drive them toward the behaviors or the beliefs that they want to cultivate in order to accomplish a certain outcome that they want to accomplish? So I mean, any tips or tricks on how to, don't focus on the tasks at hand, focus on the real meaning of why you're doing it?
Yeah, look, always in everything, things need to get trained up. They have to get trained up. Muscles don't just like build, themselves. And usually what has to happen is that muscle needs to be stressed in order for it to get built, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that, I work with myself and with people that I coach is a training program around how do you make that powerful why become more meaningful to you on that consistent basis. Listen, I don't think about my powerful why every moment of the day. I just
Right.
don't. Okay. It's just, that's not reality. Otherwise you just don't live that way. But here's the deal. When I was trying to become a coach within an organization called Unbeatable Mind, that was formed by a former Navy SEAL, and the curriculum that I had to go through was both intellectual skill training, how to become a coach, but there was also physical training that was built into it. Okay. And it was all tied together. It's like stacking various things on top of each other. Here's where I'm going with this. One of the things that I had to do was complete a 12-hour like crucible event, like a mini hell week for SEALs. Okay. And I mean, look, I don't want to overstate like I'm some kind of SEAL or anything like that. That's not the case. It was 12 hours, but it was continuous. It was chaos. It was VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous kind of situations. And they were trying to see if our training on terms of like mental toughness and skills and physical and all that kind of stuff was all in place. Okay. Here's the deal. It wasn't the day of the event that mattered. It was getting up at 4 a.m. 7 months before the event so that I could get my workout in before I got on the freeway to go to work. And me standing there doing burpees in my dark garage, saying to myself, what am I doing? And that's where the powerful why comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The powerful why for me was I want to be a coach. And if I'm going to be a coach, I need to be able to pass that event 7 months from now. So for me to pass that event 7 months from now, I better start training up this right now. And I got to tell you, the first event I ever did with them was do 300 burpees in 30 minutes. And I had my tail handed to me about 100 burpees in. And I had to then really realize, do I really want this or do I not? Okay. Do I really believe in this powerful why or do I not? Powerful whys are so important because they get us over the hump of those really difficult situations. They also are those North Stars for us when we have to make a decision. If you know what your powerful why is and you come across something and it's like that, yes or no, what do I do? If you know what your purpose is, what you're all about, You have the ability to tap into that. The only way that you're able, in my opinion, able to solidify that powerful why is by stressing it, by testing it, by putting yourself through, a mental crucible, a physical crucible, an emotional crucible, a spiritual crucible. These things that really stress test, who we are, what we really stand for. And so, that's what I'd say is probably my biggest, tip or technique, and what I use with my clients to say, no, let's really figure out whether you want this or not, inside of things. And it's not, my clients are not trying to complete 12-hour crucible events. They're trying to be good dads, good moms. Okay. Tell me what your powerful why is. I don't know. Well, tell me what your priorities are. Are your kids your priority or are they not? What's more priority for you? Your career or your kids? You tell me. And what do you stand for? What do you stand for? What is your thing that you literally are going to say, this is my principle? And then, what makes your hair on fire? So it works. I mean, it just comes to life. And then it's just the effort is the training part of that on top of it.
Yeah. I think it's important to focus on what you just said. I'm in the world of education, and that's a huge theme that's pushed on teachers and administrators, finding your why and constantly going back to your why, and that'll help you serve kids better and things like that. I think it's really important to think about the process of, what you just mentioned, really keeping it at the forefront of your mind and training it. I think that's great advice.
That is the Delta Theorem. The Delta Theorem is actually a math equation. Okay, that's why I call it the Delta Theorem. And this is what it looks like. Alpha over P cubed by EF squared equals delta. That's the math equation. It's not math. I simply wanted to have this framework to say, I know that people know these various elements. They just don't know what to do with them, right? And so alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. It's intended to tell somebody that's your primary purpose. That's your one thing, right? It sits on top of P cubed, which again, we touched on this: priorities, principles, passion. The foundation for our purpose, the thing that it sits on, is our priorities, our principles, and our purpose. And then it's supercharged, multiplied by E, effort. And then F stands for failure, which most of us look at as negatives in our life. But conceptually, this is the only place where math is actually in this theorem. When you square a negative, it becomes a positive. I don't know how it works. -2 times -2 is +4. I don't get it. Never did, but that's the way that math works. Conceptually, here's what I'm telling people. Square up your failures. Look at those negatives, square them up, learn from them. Because anytime you make effort, you are likely going to fail at times, right? And so that's all that side of it. It equals delta, and delta is a symbol for change, for impact, for making a difference. So I simply use this as almost a shtick to be able to help people have this framework that they could think to themselves, how do I know what my purpose is? All right, I can break it down to these little bite-sized things. What do I need to do about effort? Oh, failure, oh, that's right. I got to learn from this. I square that up. And then all that equals, the thing that I think we as human beings actually really want, which is this larger story, which is to have an impact, to make a difference, to come alive. Like when you're around somebody that's really alive, they know what they're up to. It's infectious, man. I mean, I dig it, right? And I've heard some of your other guests on this show. They're alive in what they're doing, and you just dig it. You can feel it, you can hear it, and they actually know what their delta is, and they're living in that delta, very much so. So yeah, that's what this whole thing is all about.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned impact briefly. Speaking of impact, it's something that's often talked about, often thought about in the world of leadership, especially. It's a concept that a lot of people talk about, but not very many of them really grasp it. What's one actionable thing that leaders could do to immediately enhance their impact?
Look, I'm a broken record. I think that knowing what your why is, or knowing your purpose is where you're going to really kind of like figure that one out pretty quickly, right? I mean, that's why I have, behind me, on purpose with purpose. That's kind of the thing, is like, you got to know what that purpose is to be able to really kind of then live into that impact. But, look, there's also the sides of like, you got to do something about it. You got to put it into action. I mean, when I wrote my book, I was shocked, and unpleasantly shocked to learn from my publisher that she said, that only 2% of the people that are out there will actually buy your book and actually, read it and do anything about it. I'm like, wait, what? I'm thinking I've got something to say to people and it's going to like, be impact. It's just, people don't do anything with stuff. They don't put it into action. Are you familiar with Tim Grover at all?
Yeah, I am.
Have you read Relentless or his other book, Winning?
I haven't read any of his books. I've followed him. I actually tried to get him on my podcast, but didn't hear anything back. But he's pretty big time. But yeah, I follow some of his stuff. Not in depth, but yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah, he just, I love what he has to say basically around the area of effort. He was the personal trainer to Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and this guy, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. And it's not, he didn't make his name because Michael Jordan made his name. He made his name because he helped Michael Jordan become Michael Jordan. I really believe that, is the case and stuff. Anyway, he talks about these 3 different types of people that are out there: coolers, closers, and cleaners. I don't know if you've heard this concept or not, but coolers, closers, and cleaners, right? And coolers are people that just, they want to know okay, I'm going to follow, and they have a good game, right? Closers are like, you tell them what to do, they're probably going to do it. They have a good season, right? Cleaners are like, I'm just going to clean up the mess. That's the deal. I'm a cleaner and I'll clean up the mess. And they have great careers, Impact are people that are cleaners. Now, the thing that he says is that you can't be a cleaner in all aspects of your life. And you'll have to read the details of what really makes up a cleaner. But, you're not likely going to be a cleaner on the court and in your home and in business and that kind of stuff. It's just hard. But if you're a cleaner in one of those areas, you're going to have an impact because you are somebody that the competition looks at you. You're not looking at the competition. You're making stuff happen. You're bringing people up to your level, right? And I just dig that, and I think that that's really what the concept of having an impact, is.
So the heart of today's conversation, and I haven't discussed this with anybody else on my show yet, but yet it's such a relevant topic, and it happens to everybody. But topic of today is failure, and you're going to deal with it no matter what level you're at. It's scary. There's a fear of it that's very real. Bret, have you, in your career, have you ever failed?
Question is, have I ever succeeded? Is really the thing. Oh man. Oh yes. Failure is something that we're all, very associated with. I am personally, associated in a number of different areas of life for sure. I'll give you one, for instance. Several years ago, I started a sports agency actually, and was representing players, and it was in the soccer area. And I also had an opportunity with my partners to have an international soccer match that we put on in the city of Chicago. I mean, it was a team from Mexico versus a team from Poland, which demographically in Chicago is like a home run. I mean, it's just, it really is. And people, come out and support their team from other countries, that kind of stuff. Any event, got to the day of the event, and I'm telling you, the stands were barely, anyone in there. And it was hard really, really hard, to see pretty much that my dream of representing professional sports was done. That's really what happened on that day, because I couldn't withstand the financial, burden that it placed upon me and my family, and I really had to decide, at that point in time, look, I'm gonna go home back to Los Angeles, and my wife, I knew she was gonna have a look on her face of like, look, you've tried this, it's time for you to get a job, right? I mean, that kind of thing, and that was fine. It was fine, but that heartache inside of stuff was really, really hard. And even the feeling that maybe I was a failure, but I talk about this in the book. There's a big difference between fail and having failed and being a failure, and that's, I think, the critical thing inside this. Like, no, failure is like the shame that we feel, right? And it's like it's like a definition of us. That's not true. It's not true. That endeavor failed, and I could learn from that and figure out, what am I going to do at this point in time? I can either shirk back and do nothing about it, or feel sorry for myself, or I could figure out, okay, what do I need to do? What kind of crazy adventure I'm on, but I'm going to go with it, right? And that's really what the deal was. I mean, I think that a very critical thing that is true just across the board is, you don't want to fail, then never risk.
Mm-hmm.
Never risk. But let me tell you something. You want to not live, then never risk. I mean, risk and life go together. So does failure and life go together. Like life, I'm talking about that really feeling like, I'm alive type thing. So yeah, I mean, that's just one instance in a career, let alone the times that I failed with my wife, my daughter, I mean, just as a son. I mean, yeah, it's just, we fail, but I'm not a failure. I just have failed at times.
Yeah, I think that's good to remember. So it's extremely hard to swallow it sometimes, especially if you put a bunch of time and effort into something, like the instance you just mentioned. That's some of the hardest things to just swallow and say, man, didn't cut it, and I've got to do something different and move on. That's really hard. But some of the biggest growths come from those experiences. And I look at failure as a growth catalyst, Um, is there anything recently, whether it's someone you've worked with or, um, personally, where you've really figured out, man, that was a great growth experience from not getting the job done, and now here we are, we've grown from it, and we've learned a lesson from it?
Yeah. I'll give you a personal, one. This is one that I touch on in my book as well, in the area of failure, is that, I in my career, I taken this position in as an executive with a firm, and I was asked to be in their San Francisco office, and my family stayed behind down here in LA. And the drill is that on the weekends I would fly home, not every weekend, but for the most part I'd fly home and spend time with the family and stuff. Well, early on I was trying to prove myself with my new colleagues up there, and there was a happy hour that I attended to, and let's just say that I kind of lost in this happy hour before I got on this airplane. And I'm not proud of this. There was reasons why I was, trying to prove myself, but, for all the wrong kind of like, circumstance from that standpoint. And the airline did not allow me to get on the airplane. Okay. They just did not allow me to get on the airplane. So here you have a situation where my wife and daughter are at LA International waiting for me to get off, and I don't get off. And, they couldn't find me. And it just was not a real good situation. I mean, you talk about a major failure. That was a major failure for me in my life, and nothing worse than to have, your child kind of like looking, going, what happened, right? Let alone that my wife and I put them through something that was just not good, and myself as well. But here was the deal, is that I then had the opportunity to contemplate, what am I all about? Really, what's the most important thing to me? And it came to light that what was the reason why I had taken that position up there was to provide for my family. And this was my family. And when I came home, I went to my daughter and my wife, and I had to apologize to them deeply. I had to explain to my daughter, not just like fluffing it over, but like, hey, this is what happened, and no excuses, no justification. And I'm sorry. And that will not happen again. So, that's where like picking it up and like saying, whoa, this is a major fail here. But it turned out to be a tremendous growth opportunity for me because it clarified for a lot more behaviors that I would have in the future, for sure. I wasn't so worried about trying to prove myself to colleagues in wrong ways. I was going to prove myself on the field, not off the field, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? And with my family, that like to build that trust back up, that was a huge growth kind of like situation. My daughter to this day, she will still talk about it, but she will talk about it from the standpoint of like, that's my dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my dad. He came and he knew that was just not a great thing. And she's, I don't think that there's scars from that because of the growth that happened as a result of being able to apologize and those kinds of things. These things happen to us in life, and it's important that we grow from them, like you just described.
Yeah. So you're in your book, it states that, there's a difference between fail and failure, just like there's a difference between guilt and shame. Fail says I made a mistake. Failure says I am a mistake. How does that simple mindset open the door for that learning and that growth?
Yeah, look, when you think to yourself, or when I think to myself, I am a failure, I likely am going to fall into stall mode. I'm not moving forward from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm stuck in that. And it could be a wallowing in victimhood to a certain extent, but it's also just like a justification for why not moving forward is okay, because this is definitive of me. The I failed is the where you have the opportunity to square things up, right? You get to learn from those, various aspects of life. So, that's why I pointed that out. We're all going to have fails in our life. It's just that's the way that it is. But how we orient ourselves towards that, fail is, I think, the critical thing to be able to see where you're moving forward or whether you're, getting stuck in where you're at. There's many people that they get stuck there, right? I mean, it just, they do. And, I wish that weren't the case, but I think they just have the wrong orientation towards what they're seeing and interpreting, this kind of thing. Let me share with you a little bit of thoughts also around this. There's an author by the name of John Eldredge. Are you familiar with him at all?
Nope.
John Eldredge, he wrote a book called Wild at Heart and a number of other books. In any event, John Eldredge has this concept of the message of the arrows. Okay. And I just dig this, and I'm taking this from him. This is not my original idea. And here's the message of the arrows. We put ourselves out there. We take a risk. And what happens is we fail. And that failure is like an arrow, and it gets shot, usually right into our heart. Because when we're risking something, we're putting our heart into things, right? I mean, that's the deal. And this arrow gets right in there and it hurts. And the message of the arrows is either interpreting that by saying to yourself, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. I'll never risk again. But instead, what he says is there a chance that that arrow is actually shot into your strength? And that in fact, what it's doing is it's trying to take you out from what you're really meant to be and to be stronger inside that. That instead of us shirking back and saying, I'll never do that again. I'll never go out on a date again because my heart got hurt. Or I'll never take a chance on being an entrepreneur again because, it didn't work out. Instead, what if the thought was, oh, wait a minute here. This is my strength. What can I learn from this arrow so that I can build my heart up even more inside there? Maybe I'm a great lover in the romance area. Maybe my heart is really meant to really share this with somebody. And instead of me shirking back and saying, I'll never do that again, I'm going to figure out what this is all about so that I can really give my heart to somebody. I can really give my heart to this business or this other venture. Maybe it just was the wrong venture, right? And so the message of the arrows is that we have a choice. We can either say, I'm going to make an agreement and say, I'll never do that again, in which case we just shirk back in our lives and become failures, or I failed, and this is an area that I know is strong, and I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to press forward inside of it. That's, just learning from fail.
Yeah, that's good. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, there's a serious fear in some people. Those that don't have a fear of failure are the ones that are killing it, but I would say the majority of people have some degree of fear of failure. And no matter how confident you are, do you think that fear ever goes away? And from a leadership standpoint, maybe I'm a leader that does have a fear of failure. Maybe it's a character flaw of mine. Or maybe I have some employees that are scared to fail. How can I manage that as a leader?
Yeah, look, if you figure out how it can ever go away, can you give me the tip on that? Because I'd like it to go away in my life. Yeah, look, there's always that fear of failure, I think, that's looming, outside of things or inside of things or all around things and what have you. The question really is, again, how do we interpret that fear? Fear can be something that can be really good for us too, right? It can make us very acutely aware of what's going on around us. I don't want to just go into stuff recklessly. Let's take the word passion, for instance, which is part of the P cubed. Go to any commencement address these days, and what you're going to hear is, more times than not, follow your passion, follow your passion, follow your passion. And I think to myself, wow, really? That's kind of dangerous sometimes, because it can lead me to a path that's not so great, right? It can lead me to a path that says, well, I'm passionate about playing golf. I have a daughter and a wife at home, and I stink at golf, but man, am I passionate about it. And I want to be a professional golfer. No, it don't work that way, right? I would say that fear of failure in that regard can actually help us to be more acutely aware of the things we need to do. I don't say follow your passion. I say cultivate your passion, right? Cultivate it, build upon it. And inside of building upon our passion is a little bit of fear around things of wait a minute, I need to make sure I'm going down this path, not that path, because if I go down this path, it's going to lead me to a place that it's going to take me years to turn around and go back the other way. I think that's a good thing inside of a potential fear of failure. The part that I think you're talking about, and that is so, readily available to us, is the paralyzing fear of failure. Is the one in which, somebody that's a salesperson is afraid to pick up the phone or send the email to a potential prospect. Well, okay, cultivate your passion. Maybe you're not supposed to be a salesman. Maybe you should be a support person to that salesperson and figure out how to get inside there, because you're finding out that your fear of failure is telling you something about really what makes you come alive. Those are the kind of things I'd say is that make it your friend, as opposed to that paralyzing thing that keeps us from being who we are and really alive.
Yeah. I think a genuine pursuit of a passion will eliminate, you might still have shreds of fear here and there, but it's almost to where you can target those. If I sense some fear, the most successful people kind of go hunt that out and push through that. I think that's something that could be very beneficial. And, the beneficial part of having that fear that you were talking about, if you hunt it out and try to accomplish something through that fear, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So how can leaders create a culture that encourages that learning from failure rather than, being subdued and having that fear of failure and not getting the job done because of that?
Yeah, look, I think that for my life, it has been modeling how do I deal with failure. Seeking forgiveness from those I love because I failed. Right? Not waiting for them to give me my trust back. No, actually modeling a behavior and seeking forgiveness, inside there. Taking a risk in front of your team of people so that they can take risks. Right? I mean, this is kind of I think a really was always something that was good in terms of my leadership of places, is that I recognized a lot of times that people were afraid to step forward until somebody broke the ice. Somebody did something that was just, like not crazy or off or whatever the case, but just was willing to take a risk. Because once somebody took that risk, then other people felt free to be able to take that risk too. So it might be me asking a question in a meeting that I knew that other people wanted to ask, but they were too afraid of career jeopardy for themselves. That's what they thought in their mind. And so I would ask that question. And it allowed them the ability to kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can ask a question too. So I think it's the modeling of how we can both take risks and also deal with failure so that other people can see and they feel freed up to be able to follow, in your footsteps around that.
Yeah. Do you think somebody can fail? Like, say a leader, for example, like I'm modeling it, I'm going out on a limb and taking my team with me. And if we accomplish it, great. If we fail, we'll learn from it. Do you believe somebody can fail and still increase their credibility amongst the people they lead?
I, absolutely. I mean, I think that, we as leaders, unfortunately, feel like we're supposed to be perfect. And we think that that's kind of the deal. Is like, if there's any flaws in us whatsoever, that somehow we think that our team won't follow us. And yet, when you're fully authentic and you really are like, kind of showing that, look, I got warts too here. Those are the people that always, that have the best followership. I would say that creating a followership is being authentic inside of those, various things, especially, around failure. It's critical that is the case. And yeah, I mean, the hardest part is that I always felt like this, in my corner office as a C-level executive, that, I had this kind of like people were afraid to come in and talk with me or whatever. And I ended up with like no friends inside the organization because people were intimidated by that particular thing. And maybe I created that myself at times. You know what I'm saying? And it wasn't like an arrogant, I've arrived, but there was kind of a decorum that was also a component of stuff. But the ability to be aware of that and with humility, true humility, be authentic with your team, that's where you create the followership, inside of that. So, by all means, I think failure can help solidify situations. I honestly, if anyone says, the people that say that they have no problems or that are perfect, I don't trust them, believe it or not.
Nope.
It's the ones that I know have like, they've struggled and I've seen it. Whoa, they've been through it. They've been through it. They've been forced to grapple with a lot of different things. That's who I can like go, okay, all right, now let's talk. Like, let's get together around that kind of stuff. So I in a weird way, I want people that have failed, because then I know that like they know what that feels like, what that tastes like, what it is, and where they need to go from there. And they're more trustworthy as a result of that.
Yep. So self-reflection is something that I've talked about on a couple of my previous episodes, but it's so crucial in learning from failure. Um, let's say I've failed. I've made a plan to learn from it, have learned from it. What specific steps can I take to make sure that I don't make that same mistake again?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that one thing that we don't do well enough is like, I think it's called post-mortem, kind of like, look back and recapitulate what's going on there. You just use some kind of words that are, sorry, that are not so readily acceptable, but looking at something after the fact and evaluating it after the fact, right? Both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
Success, what did we do that helped to create that? And also, success, what were the things that didn't go so well, but we still succeeded inside there? It's always a post-mortem that's going on there. One of the things I learned inside this coaching program that was, instilled in us from the culture that the founder from the Navy SEALs basically talked about is that they would do a post-mortem after the fact. They would look at, one of the things that after one of their missions or whatever, they'd come back and they'd look at it and evaluate it. I never did that in business. Why? Why do we not do postmortems inside of stuff? Like really dig into together. Why? Because it's scary. You don't want to point out what your flaws are and that kind of stuff. But boy, talk about squaring up your failures. That's where you learn from them, is when you look back at them and evaluate them with reality, not like somebody's telling you you're great, you did this great, you did that. No. Come on, as a team. What did we not do so great on this particular thing? What did I not do so great on this particular thing? And that's where, we can learn and do that. You got to create an environment, right, where people feel free and comfortable to be able to do that without career jeopardy, career risk, or whatever the case is. And it's always done in the form of relationship and time and sticking together and going through hard times and that kind of stuff, because it ain't going to happen just like because you throw people into a conference room. That's not the way that it works.
Yeah. So I had a guest on here a couple months back, Jamie Beckler. Not sure if you're familiar with him or not. He was a former college basketball coach, but he was talking about I think I asked him a question: where did he experience the most growth throughout his career? And he said the first time he got fired.
Mm-hmm.
And he took it hard, called a coaching buddy that he had, just so happened to be a Division I basketball coach that had also been fired recently. But he gave him some advice, and he said, you have two choices after a failure like this. You can be bitter about it and not grow from it and stay stagnant, wallow in your despair, whatever you want to say, or you can be better from it. And he said that really resonated with him, and he took it throughout his career in the future. Like with any situation like that, he approached every potential thing that he could fail at. That's how he approached it. And so it eliminated some of that fear of failure for him. But what are some tips or advice that you would have for someone who wants to kind of develop a plan? So I'm kind of a black and white guy. I need to write things out, make checklists or, reminders. What are some just quick tips or advice you have for somebody that would want to make a plan for fixing their mistake or squaring it up, as you say, and preventing it from happening again?
Buy the Delta Theorem and put it into practice. I'm kidding. That was a self.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. No, look. I think that maybe there's a lot of things that people can do, and they'll know they're relatively practical. Here's what I'd say: remember history for yourself. None of us ever points to the successes in our life when we say, in answer to a question, when did you grow the most? We always point to those times that were the down times.
Mm-hmm.
Always, always. Because successes, I mean, they're important for sure, but they don't linger. They don't
Right.
stick. You know what I'm saying? They don't stick. And that feeling of overcoming, that feeling of resilience, that feeling of having exhibited grit, that is special in all of our lives. That's the one that when we're asked the question, tell me, like, when was a time in your life when, like, not you overcame, but like you just felt like, you were like, oh, it's when I lost my job and I was like having to figure out at that point in time, what am I all about? And I had to figure it out, and
Mm-hmm.
that's when I figured it out. That's what we always point to. So remember your history. Remember the things that, like, you did overcome, and how you felt about that, how that feeling of resilience made you feel. And you can have that again, right? You can have that again if you just say, look, here I am. I'm not wallowing in this. I'm getting up and I'm going from here. I was watching Novak Djokovic play, who's the Spanish guy who's so good? Alcaraz, in Wimbledon
Mm-hmm.
last year. And it was the third set, and Alcaraz was on fire, and Djokovic was like on the ropes, basically. And there was this insignificant point where Djokovic went down and he was face down, on the grass. He just, happened to he went the wrong way or whatever, and he was face down the grass. And I noticed that he popped up immediately. Just, it was for me, it was so noticeable. I don't think any, maybe people didn't notice or whatever. He popped up. And I thought to myself, that's a champion right there. That's a guy who knows that he could have lowered his head, sighed, because the tide was against him. His own skills were not working that well right then. He could have just laid down there, and he didn't. He popped back up. And I think there was a message he was saying to Alcaraz, no, I know I'm not playing well, but I'm here, and you're going to have to beat me, right? And he also said something to himself. No. I am here, and I'm not going to lose to myself inside there. That is grit and resilience. But it was when he was down on his face that happened. So, that's how I see it.
Yeah. That's very, very good stuff. I think of back to the growth piece, and you said something that made me think that's right. You ask people about that. When is that time in your life that you've grown the most? And every single time it's after something negative.
Yeah, always.
And so it's so obvious to me that that's where you experience the most growth and the most self-reflection. You don't, if you're excelling at something or you make a big sale or close a client or something, you don't really look back and say, how did that happen? You're like just celebrating it and moving on to the next one,
Yeah.
But if you don't, you're going to look back and analyze what the process was and why didn't that happen? What did we do here or not do here? That's where the most growth happens. So that's a very good nugget there.
Yeah, look, that the subtitle of my book, when I talk about truly wealthy, that word truly is pretty important inside there. It's meant for a purpose. I worked with these folks that they were wealthy folks. Okay. But true wealth is a different story. True wealth is about more than just financial wealth. It's relational wealth. It's physical wealth. It's the wealth of time. It's mental peace of mind wealth. It's all these various aspects of wealth, which is kind of what we've been talking about, is how do we tap into, to that particular aspect of stuff. And just the ability to, like, recognize that sale is probably going to pad your bank account, And I'm telling you, that feeling don't last. I
Right.
saw it with my clients. It doesn't last. But you know what does last? That feeling of overcoming, that feeling of
Hmm.
resilience, that feeling of like, oh, yeah, when stuff was against me, now it's a real story here. Now let's figure out, what I need to do here. And that is the thing that like we measure ourselves. At least I do. And I think that the people that all of us do, those are the things that are like, oh yeah, let me tell you the time when like this happened and stuff. And it wasn't, oh, I made this big sale and what, doesn't last. Doesn't last.
Right.
It's not true wealth. True wealth is when all those things are all tied in together.
Yeah. Love it. So tell me a little bit about your book. We discussed it a little bit. Who's your target audience for that, and who might benefit the most by reading it?
Here's a target audience. It was me at a certain point in time, and this is what it looked like. Wife, daughter, house, career, dog, church life, community, driving to my office in Los Angeles on the 405 freeway, which is not a freeway, it's a parking lot at the time that I was going, and sitting there and having this all too familiar sigh. That sigh that says, really? Really, this is it? Like, this is it? Like, I, I know there's something bigger that's going on in this world. I just know there is. And while my life felt very big, and all of our lives feel big, I kind of know it's kind of small in the whole scheme of things, really. And I want to tap into something much larger than that. I just don't know how to like have a framework to help me to tap into that. That's who it's targeted for. This is a framework that is like, let's talk about what the difference between priorities and prioritization is. Let's talk about what principles really mean and how you might come about them. And frankly, what are some of the things that come against being a principled person in this world? Let's talk a little bit about the difference between follow your passion and cultivating your passion. Let's talk a little bit about what your purpose is. And by the way, you not wanting to state what your purpose is, because if it changes in the future, I've just said what it is now. I don't like to be able to commit to that. So I don't like taking the optionality off the table. Let's talk about how the optionality of purpose can stay on the table. Let's talk about what it means to like really supercharge and put effort into things so that you're not just sitting on the freeway sighing, but you're feeling like, no, I'm doing something here. Let's talk about how, the failure that makes you feel like, I just sighed. I just messed up my family. I'm hiding on the 405 freeway now. I'm so glad I got to leave the house right now because I'm a total failure inside. Let's talk a little bit about that and what that looks like so that at the end of the day, we can all figure out a way to tap into the much larger story. Now, I'm not talking about a larger story that has to be more than being a great dad. That can be a large story. If I feel like I'm in that flow state of what is going on in this like much larger thing that we kind of know. And then there are some people whose potential is so great that they should be larger than life. They should be the ones that are leading all of us and us getting behind them and that kind of stuff. That's who it's written for, to help them come alive so that they can figure out, all right, what do I need to do inside there? The truly wealthy component of stuff is not a wealth management book. It is not about wealth management, even though I was a wealth manager. I'm just talking about that thing that we all know that is like, really? This is it? My bank account is full and this is it? Like, no. Let's talk about what truly wealthy is and like what is like more important in life. That's who it's written for, is anyone who feels like they want to make an impact, have a difference, be part of something that's much larger. Pick it up. There's questions in there to prompt you along, opportunity to tap into me and that kind of stuff. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out for sure, because you just described probably 80 or 90% of the people in the professional world now.
For sure.
So,
yeah.
So where can my listeners kind of find some stuff that you do, and where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, the easiest place I made is a landing page called connectwithbret.com. Okay, connectwithbret1tbret.com. It's a single page landing page that has my bio there. It's got links to a website. It's got links to, offerings that I have, coaching offerings, consulting. It's got a link to my book. It made it very easy for you to just kind of get that and go there. So it's connectwithbret.com. And then from there, you can tap into social media, whatever, just all kinds of different places that you can access me.
Cool. Last question here. What do you want your legacy to be at the end of the day? And what do you want to be remembered by?
Great question. And, look, for me right now, I would like people to say, that guy inspired me to come alive. That guy tapped into something that was already with me, and I can identify with that. He can identify with me, and he inspired me to come alive. There's a quote that was very pivotal and is very pivotal to me, and it says this. This guy by the name of Howard Thurman. He said this. He said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are really alive."
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask what the world needs. That's like a marketing pitch. Ask what makes you come alive, and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are really alive. That's cultivating passion. That's figuring out your principles. That's figuring out your purpose and that kind of stuff. So yeah, if anyone were to say, that dude, he inspired me to come alive, then I'd say that would be my legacy I would love to have, with me.
Yep. I tell people all the time, if I just impact one person, it's all worth it, what I'm doing.
That's it.
So,
that's it. And by the way, that's a larger story right there. I mean, we think about larger story, and I talk about larger story as if it's like numbers or something like that. No, if one person listened to this podcast and I inspired them to come alive, that's fantastic. You know why? Because they're going to inspire 2 people to come alive, or they're going to impact their family or whatever. It's exponential, right? So yeah, it's one person. One person is really is good enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bret, I'm glad we could connect, and I really appreciate your insight on failing, which everybody does. And hopefully my listeners can grab some pieces of this and apply it to their situations. And love your energy, man. And I look forward to checking out your book and following you going forward. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. This has been just really a great time. So appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Lead to Win podcast. If you're listening this week, make sure to drop a rating on whatever app you're listening on. I'd love to hear from listeners and make this podcast even more relevant to you. Also, make sure to follow the Lead to Win podcast on social media. We're on Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Give us a follow and feel free to share the content. Again, thanks for listening this week. I'm your host, Bo Bergen. See you next Tuesday.